The clear, golden oil sitting in your pantry right now is a lie. We are told that canola is the benchmark of health, a triumph of modern farming that conquered the globe. But this dominance is a historical accident. It is not based on nutrition, and it is certainly not based on biology. For 3,000 years, our ancestors relied on a different liquid gold. It was stronger, richer, and virtually indestructible. It didn't just feed civilizations. It kept them alive through the harshest winters on record. But you cannot find it at the grocery store today because it was systematically erased. We didn't stop growing it because it failed. We destroyed it because it was too good for the industrial machine to handle. The plant is Camelina sativa, and its return isn't just a trend. It is a biological necessity. To understand what we lost, and you have to go back before the tractors, before the chemical fertilizers, and before the branding. You have to go back to the Bronze Age. Camelina sativa, known to history as the gold of pleasure, or German sesame, was not a niche ingredient for health nuts. It was a foundational pillar of European survival. Native to the harsh landscapes stretching from Finland to the Ural Mountains, this plant was the ultimate survivor. Archaeological digs confirm that Neolithic peoples didn't just gather it. They built their agricultural systems around it. They grew it alongside flax and ancient grains, understanding a synergy that modern science is only now rediscovering. Excavations at Apokra in southern Sweden uncovered something extraordinary. Concentrated seed deposits containing over 154,000 camelina seeds stored separately from other crops. This wasn't a weed mixed into the harvest. This was deliberate, large-scale cultivation that reveals camelina's economic centrality in Iron Age Scandinavia. The contrast is stark. In the south, Roman elites monopolized olive oil through expensive industrial pressing operations. In the north, peasants achieved economic independence through camelina. They pressed the seeds using simple wooden wedges and stone mills, technologies any farmer could access without infrastructure. That accessibility was revolutionary. The archaeological record confirms this dominance across time and space. In Bronze Age northern Greece, where olive trees couldn't survive the climate, camelina became the primary oil crop sustaining entire communities. The plant's range stretched from Switzerland's Neolithic settlements around 2200 BC to the steppes of Romania and the frost-bound fields of Scandinavia, appearing consistently in archaeological sites spanning over 2,000 years, not as a minor player, but as a staple found in quantities that suggest large-scale cultivation and storage. In a time when a single frost could mean starvation, camelina was the insurance policy. This is a crop that wakes up at 1 degree Celsius. It can survive a freezing snap of minus 11 degrees Celsius when it is just a seedling. While other crops withered in the cold or died from thirst, camelina thrived. This resilience is partly due to its incredibly short life cycle. As a short-season summer annual, it can rush from seed to harvest in just 85 to 100 days. This speed allowed ancient farmers to squeeze a harvest out of short northern summers, where slower crops would fail. It could even be grown as a winter annual in milder climates, keeping the ground covered and productive when nothing else would grow. It was the definition of a low-maintenance relationship. The plant possesses wild traits that modern breeding has stripped away from our current food supply. One of these traits is allelopathy. That is a fancy way of saying the plant fights its own battles. Camelina roots release natural chemicals, like benzylamine, into the soil that suppress weeds, effectively creating its own herbicide perimeter. The ancient farmer didn't need to break his back weeding the camelina field. The plant did the work for him. For thousands of years, this was the oil of the people. It provided a massive source of energy and essential fats in diets that were often lean and scarce. It was pressed in simple wooden wedges or stone mills, requiring no heavy industry to release its treasure. The oil was rich, flavorful, and incredibly stable. It fueled the lamps that lit the Iron Age and fed the bodies that built the first cities. It grew in sandy soil where wheat would fail. It grew with little rain. It required almost no help from the human hand to produce a harvest. For the peasant farmer in Eastern Europe or the steppes of Russia, Camelina was freedom. It meant you were not dependent on the perfect weather or the perfect soil to eat. You simply scattered the seed, and the gold of pleasure would rise. But an asset this independent was a threat to the coming age of industrial control. The very traits that made it a hero to the ancients, its wildness, its complexity, and its bold chemical profile, were about to become its death sentence in the modern world. The murder of Camelina was not committed by a pest or a plague. It was committed by a factory process. As the world rebuilt itself after World War II, the food system underwent a radical transformation. The goal shifted from resilience to scale, and from nutrition to shelf stability. We entered the era of margarine. The Western world developed an insatiable appetite for solid vegetable fats to replace expensive butter. The technology to create these fats is called hydrogenation. This process involves blasting liquid oil with hydrogen gas to stiffen it. But the chemists hit a wall. Camelina oil is rich in a specific fatty acid called alpha-linolenic acid. This molecule has 3 double bonds, which makes it incredibly biologically active, but chemically stubborn. The chemistry is brutal. You heat oil to 200 degrees Celsius. You blast it with hydrogen gas. Then, you force a reaction using a nickel catalyst. The goal is to break the molecular bonds and stuff them with hydrogen until the liquid turns solid. For simple oils, this works. For Camelina, it is torture. Its triple bond structure fights back. To win, factories had to crank the heat and pressure to dangerous levels. They didn't just harden the oil, they destroyed it. Even worse, the process twisted the natural molecules. It flipped them from a healthy shape to a toxic shape. They were creating metabolic poison. Manufacturers needed an oil that would surrender quietly. When factories tried to hydrogenate Camelina, it produced off flavors and a fishy odor that consumers rejected. The industry needed a blank slate. They needed an oil that was chemically simple, bland, and compliant. They found their answer in rapeseed, the parent of modern canola. Rapeseed was high in monounsaturated fats, which were easy and cheap to turn into margarine. So, the decision was made. Processing uniformity was valued over nutritional density. But the final nail in the coffin came from the government. The green revolution of the mid-20th century was built on high-input, high-yield monocultures. Governments in the US and Europe poured subsidies into corn, soy, and rapeseed to maximize calories per acre. These massive financial safety nets, like the Common Agricultural Policy, were designed to support yield-maximizing commodities. Camelina was left out in the cold. It was categorized as a minor crop, meaning it received no research funding and, crucially, no subsidies. Farmers are rational economic agents. They could not afford to grow a risky, unsubsidized crop when the government was paying them guaranteed money to grow the industrial favorites. The lack of a lobbying body meant Camelina had no one to fight for its place in the Farm Bill. By the 1950s, the plant that had fed Europe for millennia was reclassified. It was no longer a crop. It was a weed. They called it false flax and sprayed it with herbicides to clear the way for productive fields. The erasure was nearly total. Then came the rebrand. In the 1970s, Canadian scientists bred the toxins out of industrial rapeseed, specifically erucic acid and glucosinolates, and gave it a new friendly name, canola. The name literally stands for Canadian oil and low acid. It was a marketing masterpiece. Canola was branded as the modern, heart-healthy miracle. It was cheap to grow with heavy fertilizers, easy to process with harsh chemicals, and completely flavorless. It was the perfect fit for the factory. Camelina, sitting in the germplasm banks and peasant fields of Eastern Europe, became a ghost, a relic of a time when food was grown for survival, not for the convenience of a margarine factory. But the science has returned to vindicate the ghost. When we strip away the glossy marketing and look at the actual biology, the comparison between canola and Camelina is not a contest. It is a massacre. To understand why, we have to look at the invisible war happening inside your bloodstream right now. The modern diet is broken. We are drowning in fats that fuel inflammation. Think of inflammation like a fire in your body. To keep you healthy, that fire needs to be controlled. Our ancestors ate a balanced diet that kept this fire in check, 1 part fuel to 1 part water. Today, that balance is shattered. We are pouring gasoline on the fire, eating 15 times more inflammatory fat than we should. And canola oil, despite the heart-healthy sticker on the bottle, is part of the problem. It is biologically lopsided, containing twice as much of the fat that feeds the fire as the fat that fights it. Camelina flips the script entirely. It is a biological anomaly. It is packed with up to 40% omega-3s. That is the cool fat, and the one that acts as a fire extinguisher. This gives camelina a perfect ratio that favors the good stuff. It doesn't just sit there. It actively works to put the fire out. Now, here is the catch that usually stops people in their tracks. Usually, finding this level of healthy fat in a plant comes with a terrible price. The only other plant that compares to camelina is flax. But flax is useless in the kitchen. The oil is so fragile that you cannot cook with it. If you put flax oil in a hot pan, it breaks down instantly, smells like paint, and loses all its health benefits. It is too weak to handle the heat. Camelina breaks this rule. It is the only oil on earth that is rich in these delicate, healthy fats, but is also built like a tank. It can sit on a shelf for 2 years at room temperature without spoiling. The secret is its armor. Camelina is naturally loaded with a supercharged antioxidant, a specialized form of vitamin E. But while canola has a tiny amount, barely enough to keep itself alive, camelina is packing a massive arsenal. It has a 700% advantage in vitamin E content compared to canola. Think of this vitamin E as a bodyguard. When heat or oxygen tries to attack the healthy fats in the oil, the vitamin E steps in and takes the bullet. It intercepts the damage before it can hurt the oil. This gives unrefined camelina oil a smoke point of 475 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that in perspective, extra virgin olive oil burns at roughly 375 degrees Fahrenheit. You cannot sear a steak in olive oil without it smoking and turning bitter, but you can throw a steak into raw. Cold-pressed camelina oil, crank the heat, and it stays stable. To get canola oil to handle that kind of heat, manufacturers have to bleach it, deodorize it, and strip it down in a factory using harsh solvents. Camelina is born ready. You get the performance of a factory oil with the nutrition of a raw superfood. The superiority extends to the field too. Agronomists call canola a racehorse. It is fast, but it is an addict. It demands massive amounts of fertilizer to survive. If you stop feeding it, it dies. Camelina is the workhorse. It doesn't need to be pampered. It hits peak growth on a fraction of the food canola requires. This efficiency doesn't just save the farmer money. It stops chemical runoff from poisoning our water. The water story is even cooler. Under drought conditions, camelina gets smart. It changes its own body. Instead of trying to grow more leaves, the plant sends a signal to its roots. Dig deep. It invests all its energy into building a massive, scavenging root system. It hunts for water in deep soil layers that shallow crops like canola can't reach. It survives where the racehorse dies. But the most incredible advantage is its immunity. If you drive past a canola field in North America, you are looking at a war zone. Farmers are fighting a tiny black bug called the flea beetle. This pest devours seedlings. To stop it, farmers have to coat their seeds in pesticides that kill bees just to get the crop out of the ground. Camelina does not need this poison. It fights its own battles. Field trials show that flea beetles will destroy a row of canola and leave the camelina next to it completely untouched. Why? First, camelina leaves are covered in tiny hairs. To a bug, this feels like chewing on barbed wire. Second, the plant is full of a natural compound that tastes terrible to insects. It is a natural biological weapon. The plant protects itself. We are pouring chemicals onto canola just to keep it on life support. Meanwhile, the ancient alternative stands in the field, immune, drought-tolerant, and nutrient-dense. The math is absolute. We traded a biological fortress for a chemical dependent. The exile is over. Camelina is staging one of the most significant comebacks in agricultural history. But it isn't returning to fight canola for shelf space in the grocery store, at least not yet. It is being resurrected by a force far more powerful than food: the global energy crisis. The aviation industry is desperate. Batteries are too heavy for jets, so they need liquid fuel to decarbonize. Camelina oil is the perfect candidate. It can be hydroprocessed into sustainable aviation fuel that cuts greenhouse gas emissions by up to 80%. Major airlines are pouring millions into mass producing this crop, creating a supply chain that hasn't existed for a century. But this massive resurrection has created a fork in the road for the seed. Path 1 is the industrial route. This is where the vast majority of the harvest goes. The oil is sent to massive refineries, where it undergoes intense chemical conversion. Through processes like hydroprocessing or transesterification, the oil is stripped of its identity. It is blasted with hydrogen, heated to extreme temperatures, and cracked into hydrocarbons. The result is a high-performance fuel that powers jet engines and heavy logistics. It saves the planet, but you cannot eat it. It is purely energy. Path 2 is the kitchen route. Because the energy sector has paid to put the crop back in the ground, we now have access to the raw biological treasure again. A small but growing faction of producers is taking the seed before it hits the refinery. They treat it differently. Instead of chemical baths, they use simple mechanical pressure. This is cold pressing. The temperature never exceeds 120 degrees Fahrenheit or 50 degrees Celsius. There are no harsh chemical solvents like hexane, which are used to strip canola. There is no bleaching. There is no deodorizing. This fork gives us something modern food has lost: a raw, stable cooking oil. And because the seeds are soft, unlike the hard pits of olives or the toxic raw state of soy, so you don't even need a factory. You can press this oil yourself in your own kitchen using a simple hand-crank device like a pateba press. The power of production is returning to the people. Chefs at five-star restaurants are the first to realize what this means. They are getting an oil with a smoke point of 475 degrees Fahrenheit or 246 degrees Celsius, higher than unrefined olive oil, that still retains all its bioactive nutrients. It offers a flavor profile of fresh asparagus and almonds, not the bland neutrality of industrial oil. It handles the heat of a sauté pan without oxidizing, a feat that chemically processed oils can only fake. This is the Trojan horse. The energy industry built the door, but the superfood is walking through it. Camelina is slowly creeping back into the pantry, offering a way to sear a steak without inflammation. The revival is here. And this time, we might just be smart enough to eat it instead of just burning it. The choice between canola and camelina is a choice between two different worldviews. Canola is the champion of calories per acre, a system designed for volume and uniformity, where crops depend on chemicals to survive. Camelina is the champion of resilience per acre. It defends itself, feeds the soil, and delivers nutrition without demanding the earth in return. The history of agriculture is full of mistakes. Erasing this plant was one of the biggest. We traded a biological fortress for a chemical dependent. We chose factory convenience over nutritional firepower. But nature is forgiving. The gold of pleasure is back, supported by billion-dollar energy investments and rediscovered nutritional science. This time, we have a second chance. We know what we lost. The question is, are we finally smart enough to keep it? What's your take? Is camelina the future or just hype? Drop your thoughts in the comments.